I'm Owen Hill. I'm an engineer, I graduated as a PMG cadet engineer, so I was a telecom engineer who got interested in hobby electronics like a lot of people we're interviewing these days. But our real fame came when we made the Australian computer called the MicroBee. It was aimed at schools and at home usage, so it was one of Australia's first personal computer. Yes, I've always had an interest in electronics. I think as a little school kid I would get on the train and come down here to Sydney, where we're interviewing today, and I would buy parts and go home with a little kid and solder them together, so I had an interest all my life from school days in electronics. I think I got an interest at school in the transistor, so I was at the post-valve vacuum tube era, and the transistors came out and became readily available through the hobby markets. It was possible for a school kid to get one of these and solder things together and listen to music. Yeah, I went to university in the 60s, which was then formally training, but I'd been involved playing with the hobby electronics, because the disposal stores, you would go in and get these old wartime disposals, and oftentimes you'd buy VDU tubes, or a little thing called a 913, I forget its name, doesn't matter, but a 1-inch phosphor tube, and used for, yes, I played with valves, made valve, Tesla coils, all those things, irritate all the neighbours with interference, when I could have 6-inch sparks going across the back. It was that era. I got involved with the electronics magazines like Electronics Australia and others, and then you were building useful products. So we would build, first of all, smaller kits into demonstrate things like a time delay or a light controlled relay, and then you'd move up to building hi-fi amplifiers, and it was much better to build your own rather than buy one off the shelf. I made one of the first FM radios when FM radio came out in Australia. So yes, we could build these, and it was so satisfying at home to have the one you'd built on the shelf. In 1979, I started a business called the Electric Mailbox. I left PMG Telecom and I thought, I'll run a mail order business from home. So it was almost like a miniature version of Dick Smith, because I realised you could buy these semiconductors at very big discounts for 100 off and sell them one off to hobbyists. So I would run ads in the electronics magazine, and then rapidly realised I just had all these bits. The best way to do was to design an article, such as a hi-fi amplifier or something else, and then sell a kit. So I became involved in the magazines in writing articles on kits and then selling the kit through my business. And as history evolved, we made microprocessor kits. And in 1981, I realised our days were numbered if we didn't make, or that we saw the vision of building what became the MicroBee. So 1981, I took team of probably 4 or 5 of the youngest and brightest fellows in the company, and we actually went into a group deliberately putting what we'd learned from the microcomputer chips we'd made and put together the prototype MicroBee. I've got a board you probably would see. I formed a core team. We could see that we could put together one of these computers. I'd had a guy called Matthew Starr as a young schoolboy in his final years, a fellow called Raymond Han, who lived in Melbourne, would travel up weekends to work with us, and he was probably 15 or 16 years old. John Wilmshurst, who was a senior PhD with CSIRO, so we had some discipline on the team as well. And Craig Southern is another comes who looked at our Viatel communications, and that core team, Matthew, Garner, probably Dave Griffiths also had been involved in designing our VDU and Z80, would be the key people. I think I was passionately interested but outclassed with their design skills. That I think would account for a core skill, and that attracted their mates who really helped. But within 6 months we put together a computer. The MicroBee came out of a hobby project. We'd certainly come from the hobbyist market and the elements were there, but we needed to make a production. We had to make one as a full product. So it emerged from hobby to a finished one. It was not put together as a business project. It was really almost pre-assembling a kit. Effectively, mail order meant our money came up front. People would ring and send their check in first. Not quite, but we felt the best thing to do was make the first, if we didn't know how to make them. If we put the first 1,000 out there, people could make them, and we would, when they didn't work, and that's where Dick Smith had a coupon on his kit saying, sorry Dick, it doesn't work. So we had a no apologies coupon. You don't have to apologise, you said $50 in your computer back and we put it together for you. And what we did, we got those 1,000 to see any manufacturing things we had. We'd actually put our production out through 1,000 monkeys. We've been reported through some of the business story about that, but that was the kits actually became the precursor to our production line, and we continued manufacturing, almost using a lot of things we'd learned from that kit era. In the late 1981, we realised that the kit computers, the S100 boards and the modular form of micro kits were not going to last. So I had our youngest and brightest, Matthew Starr, Garner Annette, Ray Hand, several, used to come around my home, and we took time out for probably 6 months, and we put together bits and pieces and made a computer. We didn't know what to call it then, and again my idea was to sell it in kit form, because that's the way I was used to. You get your money up front, you deliver the bucket full of bits, and the hobbyist sold us it all together. So I went to the magazine, Your Computer magazine. I spoke to Colin Rivers and his editor, and we'd booked a 32-page insert. The arrangement I had, the magazines only charged just one cost with one bit of paper, or 32 in those days. It wasn't the coverage it got. I'd asked for the cover story, an article from the magazine, and we would put this insert in, and we would launch our kit. And I remember coming away it was towards Christmas, and it was going to be booked in the February issue. The editor said, well, what are you going to call this computer? I don't know, we haven't thought about that yet. So on the way home in the car, I was talking to Matthew Starr, and he said, we've been thinking in the group, why don't we call it Bee? Because the honey, that can be the software, and the hive can be the networks. And I said, well, doesn't it make sense? You can't just have Bee. What about MicroBee? And we registered the trademark almost the next day. So the name was, we called it, then it rang the magazine the next day, it's going to be called MicroBee. It was one of those aha moments. I can still see the point of Pacific Highway in Chatswood on the way home, where we had that great idea together. So that was that aha moment. That name stuck. I would be in Russia selling computers, and I could hear Fimo MicroBee. I could speak Russian, but I knew when a computer was mentioned, it translated, became a friendly name in the schools particularly, and that's how it actually happened. So we really had a kit computer going into the magazine. The idea was we'd sell the first 1,000 of them in kit form, and that'd probably take a year. And maybe after that we'd put some together, and then we would go into manufacturing. Well, MicroBee became so strong within 2 months we'd sold the first 1,000. I did not expect what we faced. In February we released it, and we thought 1,000 of them, we'd probably take a year to sell those kits, and we'd intelligently make a production. We had a business plan, but within 2 months we could not keep up production. We were buying from everywhere. It was almost impossible. And I was trying to injection mould special plastics, which all took time as well. So by about March or April, we were probably holding in the 2,000 or 3,000. And of course then we got the New South Wales Schools contract, which just made it busier and busier. So within the first year we'd hit the ground running, and we're doing more than 1,000 a month by the end of the year. I had to advance our production plans rapidly. It were unbelievable days. We were at one time selling computers in our shop at Applied Technology at Waitara, and we're all too busy helping people, so one of the customers just came behind the counter, just take money off the other customers, put it in the cash register and keep selling. There was such a fraternity that it was like a club. Now that got the clever people together, which really helped us with say, something like MicroBee. You could see the young minds, and some were very young. John Wilmshouse, about a couple of PhDs and others who were middle-aged, so I wasn't saying we're all teenagers, but in that era there was such a cross-section of people, free-thinking, incredible knowledge, and not afraid to try different things. MicroBee was totally different. We had a kit, and we'd attracted a lot of people. For instance, in the early days we had kits. It was a school teacher, Greg Ballman, I recall his name, and he came in and said, look, I'm New South Wales Government, I'm in a very special unit. We're looking at computers in the schools. What we need is what you're doing, but do this. So its educational uses were almost specified to us straight away. And then, because we were probably more of an engineering bent than the dig side, we found that too, that they had a use. People started using them. 2 of my bright fellows were employed by a company making clutch plates for the car industry, and they made a complete computer control clutch generating system for a major issue. A medical electronic company actually made blood analysis equipment. So when Dr. Victor Cheng performed the first heart transplant, at St Vincent's Hospital was MicroBee computers out there actually analysing the blood. The AMP building in Sydney here had the the elevators were controlled at one time, and security, actually one of the hackers had actually gone in behind the scenes and looked at the security in the building, and there were 2 MicroBees running one of the biggest buildings in Sydney. So we've had a little difference that these were used by people to do things we didn't know about. There was a major tunnelling bore under Melbourne, and it was all controlled on a MicroBee. I'm told not all, but you know what I mean, the MicroBee was involved in the tunnelling equipment. So I saw these things were rapidly employed. I must give you an anecdote which is very important. In the kit days, this was one of the first 1,000 MicroBees we're sitting in front of, and a man would come each Saturday, and he had a very big American car, LTD or something, and he had these ugly yellow terry towel shorts, it doesn't matter, but he was very casual. He came in for Saturday, and he finally got his computer together. And he came, I want you to come into the office. As well as, where do you work, sir? And he became UTS. It was the, I was by the free lunch, I was ready for free lunch, and I was taken into the free lunch, and he said, now meet Vance Gladhill. He's my computer guy. Tell him about your $1,000 computer. He wants this. Here's my business school. I want $40,000 computer. Tell them about your $1,000. So the head of TAFE here in Ultimo actually said, look, he spent his own money, went through the exercise, and he had this clunky little computer on top. So I think what I'd say, this was applying technology with their money, their hearts, and how could you get contacts like that? I would say that they were the beginning of the user groups you see, but they were not trivially. This was an important part of their life, their direction. I think that's where, and I'd use the UTS one as an example. When you turned on the Apple II, you got a funny little uppercase and a cursor, which was 2 little brackets. We had upper and lower case and full graphics. A very interesting story, I had the MicroBee on show in Sydney, and the head of the IBM design team, Don Estridge, who'd led up the whole group, came to Australia. He was the keynote speaker at the conference we're at, came to me and said, oh, do you guys take Amex? You know, to buy a MicroBee, and I had an IBM downstairs, so it was an absolute flattering to have the fellow who built Boca Raton and had the biggest, fastest growing company in the world at one time come and purchase a MicroBee from me. So we were unaware of the IBM PC. We were really, we knew of it, but we were in a much more fun market. So what we were getting were, because we used to call the Trash 80, it was always full of complimentary terms for our competitors, but what really was that retail computers, so leave IBM out, they were seen as a business company, not, you know, but Apple was fun, Tandy, they were the 2 retail computers which drove the market. There are other models called Commodore and Amstrad and BBC, but the 2 that worried us most were the Apple computer, which was aimed straight at schools, and Tandy, which had radio shops. You might have these hobby shops. They owned the US chain of hobby shops called Radio Shack. And when that was in each of those, I went to America, I saw a problem we had with our kit days. Went to a colleague and he said, well, what's happening over here? Because we could see companies going broke. Oh, this industry's entering a new chapter, Chapter 11, which is the US equivalent of administration and liquidation. And the energy in that forced me to make that we really had to go into production and make the MicroBee, or what became the MicroBee, as a manufactured. People wanted a manufactured machine, not a bucket of bits and your own soldering iron. We were production bound, possibly through my own capital limitations and that. And I never ever dreamt the day we'd be making 1,000 computers a month. And by the time we went, probably 1985, we made 50,000 computers. So I had no idea that even making 1,000 computers a month. MicroBee, we were limited by production. I wanted to look at expanding in the world market, and I'm most interested in 2 guys I met from Sweden. I met them in Hong Kong once, and I thought, now Sweden's a country we can export to, and we'll develop our skills. So we started selling to computers to school, and within 6 months we won a contract in the Swedish schools. We were number 2 in the Swedish school market. It was a small country, but we were proud of that contract. But we were in the education market, so we had a contract with Apple. We shared with Apple for the Australian schools. So when you're dealing in education, it's culturally absolutely relevant. So it'll be the Macquarie Dictionary. If you don't have that word, the curriculum says it'll be the Oxford Concise First Definition. So Australia, we were more relevant than just bits and bytes. We were culturally linked in Australia. We did the same in Sweden. We had complete Swedish keyboards. We fitted in with a curriculum there. I sold them in Russia, a small number, and actually I followed Steve Jobs into Russia. He just sold the computer like it was, and I had a complete Cyrillic keyboard and issues. So I think if we understood the cultural nuances of our market, I took a school teacher from the Schools Commission with me, and we went to Moscow, and it turned out that the Swedes had been making the computer. We also supplied Finland and Denmark, and the Finns had bartered them, swapped them across the border. So the Russians had actually got some MicroBees and had them evaluating in Moscow to use in the Russian schools. I went in and I met Academician Almov, an old gentleman, fiery-haired, and I'm in charge of putting computers in the school, Mr. Hill. How many teachers have you got in Australia? So I think we've got about 100,000. He said, I have 3 million before I reach the first Russian child. So my problems are bigger than yours. But you come across here, the school teacher, and someone to talk. You're the second guy I met from the West this week. I said, oh, who else do you meet? Oh, it was that Stephen Jobs. And then Noam said, arrogant young man, he wanted to meet Gorbachev, but I haven't met Gorbachev yet. It was the most amazing meeting, and we spoke about how we localised the computers in Australia. And through Sweden and the Institute of Linguistics, we had developed a Cyrillic keyboard. So the keyboards were the correct Russian version of QWERTY. So we were talking about computers that looked like Russian typewriters. So we were, and they were about $100 each. This really suited them, because Naumov explained it would costing him $17,000 to make a copy of an Apple IIe through his military factories. It was a very interesting conversation. In Moscow, the negotiations went this way, that you had Australians on one side, we had the trade commissioner, and I had an interpreter, and then the other side with the Russian speaking. It was always English and Russian in case there was someone from the KBG needed to listen. But Naumov was fluent in English, and halfway through negotiations he said, stop, and he really commanded, and he said, Mr. Hill, I've just had a thought. We were talking about software and hardware, MS-DOS and Z80 chips and things. He said, I've just had a thought. This hardware, that's what a young man sees in a young woman. But when you get older, it's the hardware and the software that really counts. It was the most moving moments of my life to see this visionary man comment how relevant, it wasn't the computer we're talking about, it was the application, the software, the value to the human side of things. He was a luminary. They certainly bought a few of my computers. I mean, I'd never had the chance to meet Steve. He pulled out the picture a little bit when he was doing in Moscow, was when he put the guy from Pepsi and John Scully, and he was pushed out of the way, and he went to do Pixar and the other things. So a lot of times when I got in touch with a lot of the US luminaries we know today, Steve had been sidetracked a little through my era, and then Wozniak was out of the equation. I think he'd pulled out early. I was flattered when MicroBee had some difficulties at one time. I had David Strong, the managing director at Apple, say, oh, we'd like to buy you. I said, you've got to be kidding. No, I've just had an instruction from Cupertino, are you interested in selling? So one offer that the education felt that wouldn't be right, but I had an early feel, so I felt I had the same respect for Apple. They'd seen the value of the computer in education, and I think whether we'd learnt, but we knew them. I would sell with the Apple salesman. We'd go to schools together sometimes. So I don't think they needed to learn much from us. But I tell you what, they knew we both had an empathy for that education market. I think that was the issue, and it's been proven today. We did not see it as a worldwide market. I had calls from America, why aren't we selling them over there? It was a very flattering call from California. But we were able to produce Australian software relevant to the curriculum. We were able to splice things straight away in, and and also the computer was low cost. You couldn't put one computer in a classroom and get a value. We'd realised that. And it wasn't one per student, it was one between two. Because peer group pressure would have Freddie would teach Jenny how to use it and things. So, but you put a computer one between two, so the schools could buy 5 MicroBees for the price of 1 Apple on the first contract. Because these things were lower cost. So networking them together. So we were leading in the early days, and we were available. They'd been made in Australia, so they could just ring and order another lot. We worked with Telecom. Telecom helped us set up a thing called Viatel, which was really 40-bit wide email as we know it today. So, and they gave us access to every school. We were able to connect every school on the MicroBee with Telecom as our backer. They also supplied money towards software. So yes, we were localising in terms of the culture of the software. We produced a magazine called Online. There were other publications became available for something called Wildcards, did a lot of programs. It was bigger than all of us, if you like. So you asked for the team of actors, but I would go to, there were probably 30 user groups around Australia in MicroBee user groups. It was much bigger than one little company controlling the market. The market controlled us. People knew more about the MicroBee than I personally knew. We found this routine you've used, Owen, we've done that, so there was more knowledge, so they tended to own it. It was almost like my MicroBee. There was we'd really developed a sense of ownership these people had. It was a big part of how to express it differently. But yes, I found we're dealing with people. There was no trouble getting customers. As a matter of fact, when we introduced the MicroBee, we couldn't keep up production, so we had a list, probably a 2 months long list of priority when you could deliver your MicroBee. So people really always felt proud to be able to get one. They weren't abundantly available with, like your iPad you've got there, releasing the first million in 2 days. We only released, we couldn't make them fast enough. We never thought we'd ever see those days. MicroBee was totally built and designed in Gosford on the Central Coast in Australia. We bought the bits oftentimes from people like Dick Smith. Yeah, as we got bigger we imported them, but the parts were made in Australia, the printed circuit boards, they were assembled here and grew. One very important point we had is it was very labour intensive putting the keyboard together. It's just like playing Scrabble, but you've got to do it every day. And because there were individual keys. I came back from overseas, my factory mate said, oh, a guy down the road runs a sheltered workshop, he'd like to talk to you. And a fellow called John Leddy came in from what's called a Fairhaven, and I said, yeah, you could put them together for us. And he was putting plastic spoons in bags for Ansett and things like that. I said, no, well, let's work together on it. He cried too. You mean you'll let my handicapped people build those computers? And we actually put part of the work down the road. You might need to order this, but we used to pay IQ times basic wage. I was sick and tired of $2 and do it. So we had a formula, and we picked about 40 or 50 people out with varying skills. It's documented in the notes I've left with you. And the sheltered workshop, again in just down the road from us, built all the keyboards. So we were building keyboards for those to do their PhDs and others with, using not as a labour saving thing. Actually, these people felt they had such a contribution because they all knew about the MicroBee. So yes, they were made on the Central Coast in Gosford, and we made nearly 70,000 of them up there. So I met some fellows who had funded Alan Bond, who were advising the Western Australian government, and the advice was, not another engine plant, Mr Minister. You're going to build computers? You must be silly. But they said, oh Mal, if you're paying for lunch, we'll come along. And these 3 young financiers met with me, and we talked about MicroBee and what I was doing. Oh, this is amazing. It's like you're selling Cabbage Patch dolls. Because the MicroBee this is a high, I've tested myself and printed this out, so it had its own adoption papers, these guys said, and you're selling the school market, they will grow each year, you've got quite a business. We will help you float MicroBee on the Australian stock exchanges. So it was out of that I met, and I said, this is amazing, how do you do this? And they said, well, Mr Hill, if you're going to a gunfight, get a gunslinger. Some of the one-liners from the financial circuits, if you like, but these are very sweet. You're going to a gunfight, get a gunslinger. And it was a very fortuitous out of the school market again, but with government help, if you like, not out of corporate dole bludgy or anything. He was paying for the sandwiches for lunch, for goodness sake, but he'd given us the kudos of all the schools had MicroBees. We had a lot of confidence from various governments, and that led to MicroBee becoming a public company. Very difficult to answer that, because I believe in the heart of hearts the euphoria was getting past. Even while we were going through floating the company, the emotion gets past you at a time. We were drilling down, and we were aware that we were selling a CPM machine which was dated. The schools kept buying them, but the IBM PC was growing in importance. Apple had put out the Mac and the Lisa or whatever they were too. So there was already an awareness internally that we had a chance of just being a one-shot wonder, and we needed to move on. But we had all these orders coming in all the time. I couldn't cope with the business we had, let alone looking at the next, and because you don't have experience, but the next business model that would take us further forward. I went to Taiwan, I started talking to the Taiwanese clones with a company called MyTac. That became very culturally unpalatable for my R&D team, who were so fiery up about we're going to make them here and we're going to make the best computer in the world, and I was looking at whether I could form a partnership and start to sell Taiwanese clones. That was like the Pope changed his religion, but it was that. So yes, I was aware that we had to diversify, and there was a pain. We were fortunate with profitable things, but it was worrying. There was a concern in the air that it was a problem. He also knew that our competitors, like the BBC, the Acorn in England, Commodore, a lot were folding. So we could see that the business was not like we knew. And I'd studied an MBA years ago, and I saw the stories of the car industry where every model started first and only the General Motors and the Fords carried forward through, and the rest just... So I could see we'd had an industry starting, but we were among many of those starting, and we really didn't know how to move to a much bigger model. You don't have people there to tell you in Australia. In the US, they've got the venture capital market. They got some very prudent advice, and it was a lonely ride. Look, I might say I'm giving excuses, but there was an awareness even the day we floated the company on the stock exchange that we had this risk and it was probably not going to last long. The market was bigger than all of us. I think even the IBM PC was having trouble because the Taiwanese clones were being more dominant than they were Apple, fake apples, weren't they, and the Taiwanese clones. The terminology about the nasty people knocking us off. I didn't see it that way, but we certainly saw our computer was a school computer. We had that market, but it was getting dated. It was getting old. The CPM machine was that as an operating system had passed by. When you could see from the hobby markets that when you made a RAM, where the memory was fixed inside and a tape recorder, you used BASIC effectively as the operating system. So, but when you moved to disk drives, you needed to have the mentality was a disk operating system. So I went to talk to Gary Kildall in Monterey, and we got CPM because that was the language we used. MS-DOS wasn't quite around in those days, so CPM was the slickest thing you could do. So we went and got the latest operating system, which was CPM 2.2. Our guys had used Unix, and that it was always considered clunky. It didn't really get in the popular market in my view, and there were always elements of the way it was. But no, CPM had arrived through the US hobby market as well as the disk operating system of choice in the computers in the early 80s. I believe it's just the pattern of the industry. I must say we had a meeting in Canberra. Senator Button called a meeting of all of the Australian computer manufacturers, all the hopefuls. It was a day-long meeting. Department of Industry and Technology was called, and we were told about R&D grants, export incentives, protection, and we had every bit of corporate dole logic possible. We were really mesmerised, and Senator Button came along at night time and gave the after-dinner speech. He theatrically stood up on the podium and he threw his notes across the floor. He said, "Why do you ask me to come here to talk to you? Why didn't you tell me to come here to speak, to listen to you?" He said, "What's wrong with you guys? We're going to build an industry." So there was a lot of government incentive. It wasn't coercion or protection, but that we were just, who knows, we had plenty of things to do, R&D grants. I mean, I applied for a $375,000 grant one year, which meant I had to find half the money. And Canberra said, "Oh look, we haven't any other viable, we're going to give you the full money." So the fact that R&D money was available from Canberra freely to people like MicroBee, there was a lot of government help, but I don't think it was protectionism. It was, I must give you an anecdote. Senator Button rang me. I got to know him fairly well. I rang at home once. I had a property down the Central Coast, and it was just before Christmas. I had an unlisted number. "Oh, Mr. Hill, it's a bizarre phone call." "Yes, sir," because I'd had Asia or Telstra give us the phone number because I didn't have it listed. "Mr. Hill, the Prime Minister's up in Noosa. He wants to get Hazel a computer for Christmas." And I told him, "One of yours." I said, "Sir, what are you going to do to build an industry?" And 1 hour I became the greatest groupie you've ever seen. What level would the Minister of Industry for this country rig someone at home to make sure that you didn't stuff up selling a computer to the Prime Minister for Christmas? What level of cooperation can you have, He was just amazing, that sort of level. So I believe I've been very, very supported in a lot of areas. What I found in the school market, the primary schools were very glad to use our type of machine, whereas the secondary schools were moving towards business machines. So IBM was moving with, the IBM clone and IBM genuine ones into the secondary school market. In the primary school market, we'd found a real niche, which is almost like a games machine. It was non-threatening, and the children really enjoyed playing with them and doing things. So a lot of very useful software was occurring in that. Whereas when the kids were getting ready to go out of the school system, we were teaching them business systems. We were starting to use the computer as a business machine. We need to have a real competitive edge, and I possibly through my past experience can't see it at the moment, because you use that thing there. The competitive edge is the manufacturing in China and jobs. There's an accumulation of IP in there. that you would not, it doesn't come in 1 week. This is probably 20 years of Apple's knowledge in that machine you're carrying with you, so we don't have that enormous IP base. Whereas when we invented the MicroBee, we had software ready, we had certain knowledge, we mightn't have patented things, but we had a whole lot of routines, experiences, we knew how to connect things, what would happen. But if starting again, that'd be pretty hard at the moment without being able to inherit a lot of that. You'd probably have to license a good starting point to start rather than try and develop it from scratch.